Hello and welcome to Kisma and the Dark Yogi, brought to you by SourceMovement.com. We're here for people who want to be radically authentic and courageously vulnerable. Whether you're a yoga teacher building a tribe or an entrepreneur running a business, we're here to get your energy and mindset positioned for success. No more stress, no more lack of energy. Lead with full potential. Our intention is to leave the world a better place than we found it and inspire you to do the same. So let's go have some fun.
We're going to dive in a bit today about theme and constructing theme because, as some of you may or may not know, we did a webinar the other night that was really awesome. I have to say, Nick did just such a great job, and it was inspired by you guys, by being on our Facebook page and someone just saying, hey, question about a theme, or Nick put up, what's everyone talking about? And all of a sudden we realized, man, this is one of the most amazing conversations, because we believe that yoga teachers have this, it's a calling basically. We're here to lead awesome yoga classes, but we're also here to create amazing yoga experiences, because yoga is about reuniting with the self. And if you look at what that is, it's transformation. Right? It is not a twisted triangle pose. It's not a handstand. It is transformation. Now, all of these poses and flows that we do help people get into their bodies and feel awesome. And it's a gateway, right? It's a way in, and it's fun. Like, I love the physical practice. But the real yoga is living it. And so when we can speak about that in a way that our students can hear us, and let me say that again, when we can speak about it in a way that they hear us, then we've got a tribe that grows and students that will follow you for life, because they may or may not know it, but this is what they want more than anything. And of course, there's the 1 or 2% that aren't interested. And fine, awesome. That's okay. There's no judgment. But the masses in today's world want the relief of stress. They want to find that inner peace. They want to be freaking happy and have fun and live the good life, right? So that's what all of you can really provide. So I just want to pick Nick's brain a little bit. He tapped into some really, really great things, and on this call we'll dive a few levels deeper than we did on the webinar. But Nick, just in your words, is there anything you want to add about the importance of being able to create and convey a theme, and exactly what is a theme?
That's a great question. Yes, and I hear it confused a lot. So, I think there's actually not 100% clarity on exactly what a theme is, which is very interesting. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people will set an intention for a class, and then they call that the theme. Mm-hmm. Well, those are two different things. And the word, set an intention for your practice, I hear it said 1,000,000 times. And it wasn't until one day, a student came up to me after class and was like, dude, I don't really even understand what that means. And it made me think wow, I wonder how many people don't understand that. So I just started to, kind of think about how I language that, and came up with something totally different and much more simple, which is basically hey, what do you want to get out of your practice? Mm-hmm. Why are you here? That's an intention. Right? What do you want to get out of it? What do you want to create with this? That's another way of putting it. It's a little bit more of a expansive way of putting it. What do you want to create with your time here? Mm-hmm. Or what do you want to get out? Both work really well, and both are really common day language, right? That is an intention. And what that does is take that individual and make them aware of what the hell they're doing there. Mm-hmm. Why are you here, basically? A theme is a conversation or, a dialogue that you would have during class that focuses the thought flow and inspires a deeper level of thought. Right? So that's the idea of a theme. It's a congruent thought flow throughout the class. It's one layer of it, right? So if there's a philosophical piece, that's the philosophical piece, but it's a common element throughout. So there's that theme. There could be that theme. There could be a physical. A lot of people would see this in a physical theme, right? Hips. Yeah, we're going to work on hips, or we're going to work on back bends. Well, that's a theme too, right? But we're talking more about like the philosophical part, the mental and emotional piece of it that carries through, and that's the theme. It's not an intention. That's a really important distinction to make.
So let me just ask you a quick question, because you're saying philosophical. So when we deliver theme, does it have to be really involved and very heavy? Because I know that can be a deterrent to teachers. Is like, how am I going to manage my flow and my poses and all that and speak about the Bhagavad Gita?
Yeah, you have to talk about the Bhagavad Gita. You must talk about the Yoga Sutras, and it needs to be super, super deep, because that's what people are really there for. No, like, I used to do that I can make fun of it because I used to do that all the time. And people still showed up, but it was not productive, right? So philosophically, like, it's really like, what do you as a yoga teacher, like, you should have a study and a practice that gives you a deep understanding of how this applies to your life. But your job is to bridge the gap between, the intensive work and study that you've done to gain your own self-insight, to bridge the gap to people who haven't done that. And also to bridge the language set. So a lot of times, like, yoga teachers, again, will go in and they'll be speaking in Sanskrit, or they'll be just speaking in this really flowery language and everything like that. And, the yoga speak, as I would call it. And it just doesn't translate, right? Or then they try to, they'll drop a bomb with, I hear it with the sutras a lot. That seems to be the most popular one. What's that is, I think it's the first verse. It tells you what yoga is. Yoga is the cessation of fluctuations of the mind. Like, that's really cool. But as a teacher, your job is to understand the philosophical import of that in a very deep way so that you can bridge the gap. Because here's the thing. And I'll just use this as an example because it's a great example. If you go in there and try to teach people to shut their minds off, which is essentially how most people would relate to that, if I shut my mind off, it won't have the fluctuations. Well, what you're actually teaching your students to do is to suppress their thought flow. And that's extremely damaging and extremely unhealthy. And then it's frustrating because they don't know how to do that. Why? Because it's freaking impossible. And then it becomes this whole kind of twisted thing where nobody really understands, well, what is it that, like, the theme is there, and, like, that's nice if you can carry that through. But if you don't speak about it in a really practical, real-world way, which for our purposes is going to be more in the relative, not in the absolute, then people are just going to be left frustrated or not understanding it or not feeling like they're doing it right or just feeling like they're not getting it. And none of that is really helpful. So they can walk out saying, yeah, yoga is the cessation of fluctuations of the mind, and that's really nice, but how does that help you in your life?
So an example might be, say you have someone who's been working all day and he comes to your 6:30 class or 7 o'clock class, and rather than shooting off some Sanskrit about, stopping the fluctuations of the mind, you might just suggest or say something like, wow, I bet a lot of you have had really full, big days. And you might have a lot that you're still thinking about. So why don't we take a breath in, open the mouth, release it, and just ponder the idea of what life would be like if we let go of everything that we really did need to think about right now and focused on, let's start breathing. Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great way to put it. Like, that's more, and you can see, like, it's really common day language, but it's also very Kisma. Kisma would say, like, I wouldn't say that. I would say, like, hey, I joke with them a lot. I'm like, man, a lot of you left, like, skid marks leading up to your mat. Like, I know you're doing a million different things, and I think it's awesome that you're here. Why don't we just take a couple breaths and get present and see if some of the chatter in our head doesn't start to subside.
I like that a lot.
But, like, that's my language. Like, you don't have to use your words, but just, and ultimately, one of the best resources that you could check out is The 5 Love Languages. This is a really cool book that teaches you about the power of language. Now, in there, it's specific to relationships and specifically around how people relate to love and affection and feeling that. Feeling full of that, right? But if you take it just one step further, you realize that energetically, we're always communicating. Your words are one small piece of that, but they're an important piece. Mm-hmm. And if you're speaking just in a language that people don't understand, then it creates a divide.
It creates a divide.
And they can't hear you. Mm-hmm. Like, they literally can't hear you.
And so could that be the reason that we've got some, we hear from yoga teachers who are frustrated because they're like, I'm giving my heart and my soul and I'm planning my class, I'm saying all this good stuff, and people aren't coming back, or they don't seem to like it. Could it be because it just might not be in that connective conversational tone to meet the students where they are so they can hear it, right? So we have to speak a language that they can hear in order for them to even think that they like it.
Yes.
Did I just speak a language that
No. It's interesting that you brought that up, and it really made me think for a second, is that, if they can't hear it, they'll be able to just take it or leave it, because then it'll be based purely on the superficial pieces of the class, more the music, the presentation, the flow, basically all the stuff that doesn't really matter. And then they'll just wander around until they find somebody that really connects. Now, the interesting thing, and this is what stopped me in my tracks for a second, is when you speak in a language that they can hear, they'll also feel seen and heard.
And that again.
They'll feel seen and heard. And why? Because it's oh man, this person's speaking my language.
Okay.
And this is how I learned to do this, was by talking to my students and just seeing, and so many times it's man, I know that feeling, I just poured my heart and soul out and somebody was like, hey, I really dug that song you played. And I was like, dude, what am I missing?
Yeah.
Right? And now there's two pieces of that. I want to just let everybody know that there's two pieces of that. One piece, they're just going to meet it wherever they're going to meet it. And just because you laid out your heart and soul and they just like the song, it's it doesn't mean that they didn't get anything else out of it. So don't take it too personally, but do listen to the words that they say and the words that they use, and follow up with some questions so that you can start to hear them talk about what their experience is like and what they're really getting out of it, because then you can amplify that through your words and your language. Right? And you can focus on those things that are really connecting with people.
Yeah. So two things that really coming to mind, and you spoke about this a great deal in the webinar, is that personal equals universal. And the other thing, and we can hopefully cover both of these, is, Nick, when you just said, when we speak a language that they can hear, they feel seen and heard. My marketing mind immediately goes to what's the really deep seated core reason that your students are coming to your class. We know externally it's because, hey, I want to lose a few pounds, or I want to feel strong, or I love yoga, it's fun, or whatever. But trust me, internally there is this very deep-seated reason that they're there. It's the same reason why people buy things and do things. And a lot of it has to do with love and connection, or to be seen and heard.
Totally. Yeah. And I don't know if this is really, we'll go, there's a lot there, so we'll go back and kind of cull through it. And I don't know if this is more specific to women than it is to men, but the seen thing, the seen and heard thing seems to be pretty, really big for women.
I know it can be for me. Yeah. It can really be for me. And I think it's past lifetimes. It could be because I'm a woman. It could not be, but I think it's definitely a place where I go when I just feel like someone hasn't taken the time to really hear me or listen to me. And it's painful. It hurts.
Acknowledge you?
It's just to be, I guess acknowledge could be correct.
But that's not enough. It's more.
I just hear me out, see me. It's real for me. Mine will be, you're not hearing me. Because I want that communication. I want to be clear with people. And so when I feel unheard, it's painful. And that's probably why some of the yoga teachers that I've loved, that I've gone to their classes, they've created a theme that was personal but universal, and I really did feel like they were talking right to me.
Yeah.
It was like, oh. I remember leaving a yoga class and quitting one of my, like before I opened the studio, I had a couple of part-time jobs. I'm like, yeah, what am I doing? I went and quit a job right after a class because one of the teachers was like, you know, it was just funny how he delivered it. It was perfect. And I was like, yeah, this is bullshit, man. I'm quitting this job.
It really made you think.
It
like,
did,
that's powerful. Like, it's really crazy.
And he was talking about the external and how we're always looking for that, and we think we need all this stuff, and we'll drive ourselves crazy trying to get all this stuff. And I was like, you know, I can manage without that job at Moose Jaw folding sweatshirts. I'm done.
That's so cool.
I'll teach flute. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we talked about that a lot, like the personal. Well, we didn't talk about it a ton, but I did brush on it. Like, it's taking your personal experience into the universal, like into a universal language. And it does, like, there's times to use I and there's times to use we. And we'll break that down in a second. But basically, like, here's the thing. The more specific, the easier it'll be for you to make it universal. And let me explain about what you mean by that. And hopefully, like, somebody will chime in with a challenge, and then we'll talk through it. Mm-hmm. We'll kind of work it in a couple layers, and then we'll talk through it, and then we'll take that and make it into a theme.
Cool.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
So be thinking about, everybody on the line, like, be thinking about, like, if you've got a question or a challenge or something that's coming up for you, you know, we'll dive into it, and then we'll teach you how to make a theme out of it. It's really cool, because when you get past all those surface layers, then you start to get to the core of whatever it is that's agitating you. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the agitation, especially anger, is basically like if you're wanting something that you're not getting. That's pretty much all that anger is. It's just desire obstructed. Mm-hmm. So when you get down to that, you know, it's like, well, what do you really want? You know, well, I want my relationship to be better. I want us to stop fighting. Great. Well, what happens when you stop fighting? You know, well, you know, I feel more peaceful. Like, cool. What happens when you're peaceful? Because peaceful is cool, but like, do you want to just be peaceful and end out, or do you know, like, most people want something more than that, right? But they'll settle for that because their idea of happiness is simply the absence of agitation, right? Which is that's a whole other talk. We'll get into that another time. But at the end of the day, like, there's probably something that they want more. Well, what do you really want? You know, like, man, well, in my relationship, probably something like that. Man, I just want to be seen. Like, I want to really feel like he or she hears me. And really, I want to feel understood. Like, feeling misunderstood is a really big one. Right. That was one I was able to use to pretty good effect, too, in my classes, because I was the guy that often felt misunderstood. Yeah. You know? Right. But ultimately, that was really just a reflection of myself, not really understanding myself, you know, which is the whole other conversation as well. But at the end of the day, at the core of that is something that's so specific. And then that's when you can use that. You bring it out in questions. Like, that's so universal. Like, everybody has felt misunderstood at times. Everybody has felt not seen at times, you know? And then it's just a question. Like, I don't know about you, but, you know, for me, it's really painful when I feel misunderstood. Do you ever just feel like nobody gets what you're saying? Do you ever feel like a freaking alien? You know, that's the thing where it's like you kind of bring it to you for a second to just say, I feel this way. Yeah. So you own it, which is extremely authentic, and energetically people feel that, just so you know. When somebody steps in and is like willing to share something about themselves like that, like, you're modeling something very powerful for your students. Because how many people don't have the courage to say that? It's crazy. Wow. Cool. But then on top of that, you're relating to them on a very deep level. And so you're really connecting and saying, like, man, like, I feel this way. Do you ever feel that way? But it's not like, oh, man, I get pissed with the weather sometimes. Do you ever get pissed with the weather? It's like, man, like, as a human being, like, I feel like people don't get me sometimes. I feel like a freaking alien. Do you ever feel that way? So there's two things happening here. Is like, one, being able to have that, the courageous vulnerability that we talk about. Courageous vulnerability, right? Yeah, for sure. One of our isms. Like, like standing in front of people and letting them know that we're not the gurus, we're not perfect, we're just other beings that happen to know how to lead a really awesome yoga experience. It's hard to do that. But when we do that, they're like, oh,
I was in a class last night. I'll talk a little bit more about it later because I really loved the class. First time I went to this little studio, and she knew that I was a yoga teacher too, and I just had a great connection with her, but she messed up. Like, she left out a pose. And, when you're a teacher and you go to a class, you remember the flows pretty easily, and I just went right into that pose, and then she's like, oh, I left it out and came back. But she handled it really great, and it made me love her all the more because don't get me wrong, I want everyone to prepare really well for their classes, but when a yoga teacher messes up and just lets it roll off their shoulders, I'm like, awesome. They're just like me, right? They're just human beings doing the best they can be. And so that I really love. And then there was another part, but I forget what I was going to say.
That's okay. Yeah, it was really good. I one time, just a funny story, I used to, in slow flow, when I was teaching a ton, like I'm not teaching as often these days, but when I was teaching a ton, I would teach these, especially slow flow classes, with these really elaborate sequences that worked in all these creative ways. And it was really just a fun game for me. To kind of look at how I would thread together these different things for different energetic experiences in the body and intensity and stuff like that. And it was actually pretty cool. Well, one time I screwed up, and all it took was I left out one pose, and I wound up repeating like a whole 15-minute sequence on the same side, right? And then somebody started snapping at me. In the class, they started snapping at me like, dude, like we're on the same side, but they didn't catch it till the very end.
Oh.
Right. And then I was like, man, I just had kind of a funny moment in the dialogue with the class. I was like, dude, does anybody know where we went wrong? Like, where did that happen? I'll give I'll give you $5 if you can tell me where it happened, because I just totally can't figure it. And then some girl after class was like, it happened right here.
Oh,
and I gave her $5. I gave her $5, and it was funny, and she and I had a good laugh about it. But anyway, like in the class, like, I was like, hey, come back next week and you'll get the other side.
It's over. They're not going to die, and they will walk. Like, it will be okay.
It'll be okay. It'll totally be okay.
Oh, I love it. I think the other thing I was going to mention, then we can pause for some questions, is questions. Like, the reason we ask questions, I've talked about this before, and we talk about it a lot in marketing and emails and whatever, and Facebook ads. When you ask a question, when we ask a question, the brain can't help but pause, right? It's just, and I hope to God we don't become immune to questions, but I get a lot of training on this for our Facebook ads. It's if you want your ad or your post to stick out, ask the question, because all these things are going through someone's feed, and when the brain sees a question, there'll be a slight pause, which gives them the opportunity to then click on your ad. So in yoga class, we're not trying to manipulate marketing there, but we are trying to get them to pause and think.
Yeah, you're selling ideas.
You're selling ideas.
Yeah, that's a really important thing. Like, I don't know, just take this one and plant the seed. It's like, no matter what, you're always selling something.
Right.
Right, and it's not unlike a politician who's always selling his next election. You're selling them on coming back to class,
yes.
Whether you realize it or not. You're selling them on ideas that are going to change their life. So just planting that seed. Another call on that one.
Another call.
I hope somebody's making a list of all these other calls that we need to do. Anyway. The question, it's very interesting that you bring this up, too, because I went to this class one time at a studio, which shall remain nameless, here in San Diego. And the teacher was just, like, so zened out yoga, right? Like, yoga voice, like, the whole time, except for this one moment in the middle of class. It was like a little break. And she was just like, she was herself for about 10 seconds. I was like, how's everybody doing? And I was like, whoa, like, who is that? I was really excited. I was like, oh, she's awesome now. Like, I want to talk to her.
She asked me how I'm doing.
Yeah, I was like, that's great. And I actually went up to her after class and I said, hey, I don't care. I don't know if you care about this or not, but if it's okay with you, I'd like to share a thought that I had. And she's like, yeah, I'd love to hear it. And I was like, awesome. So I said, hey, do you remember that moment when you did this? And she's like, yes. And I said, that was the moment that I saw you. And it was my favorite moment of class. Thank you. And then she said, this was the part that was really interesting. It was like, thank you. They the
sort of corporate studio owner.
The they of the studio said They tell us not to ask questions. They say because it's pointless because people can't answer.
Oh.
And I was like, wow, could you be any more linear thinking?
Yeah.
Like in that. Questions inspire thought and creativity. It's not about what somebody has to say. It's about the questions that they ask. Like if you ask great questions, people are going to think in a new way.
Right.
And it's the question that actually leads the thought.
Right.
Right? They didn't invent the light bulb because, just out of the blue, they invented the light bulb out of a question. Right. Hey, how can we have light without lighting a freaking candle or a lamp? Without fire. Right. And boom, we have a light bulb. Hey, how can I talk to somebody across town without leaving my house? Freaking telephone. Yeah. Right? Cool. So the question is what really leads. And if you want to control a conversation, I don't mean it in like a control. Well, yeah, if you want to control and really
inspire the conversation.
Yeah, and really lead a conversation, you be the one asking the questions. Right? So when you ask great questions, it inspires thought. So it's really, really important. And so how that worked is the setup is about me. I feel this way sometimes. And then you ask the question, do you ever feel like that? And then they're like, yeah, I feel like that.
I'm not alone.
Yeah, now they feel seen.
Yeah.
Oh my God, somebody else feels that way. That's so interesting. And then you just have a dialogue around that. And sometimes it shows up for me like this. It's like the, what was the one that we were talking about before? Let me think. I lost my train of thought with it. I'll use this one. Man, this is pretty relevant to my life right now. It's like, wow, I don't know about you, but man, sometimes I just feel like my brain is going in a million different directions. I'm so trying to balance everything and get it all done, and I just feel like I'm disappointing everybody. And that's like real. Like that's me. Do you ever feel that way?
Okay.
And then you have a dialogue around that, like, geez, man, how much of that stuff really even matters? Boy, what would happen if you did disappoint some people? Is the world going to end?
Right.
Are they going to not love you anymore? Are they,
And where's the disappointment really coming from, yourself or others?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's you kind of lead them down that path and help them trace it back to where it's really coming from. Like, you can spend a lot of time just really diagnosing the problem. Like, you don't want to make your class super heavy about the problem, but you do want people, like, yoga is looking at yourself from a new perspective. So it's right to do some inquiry, and your questions can inspire that inquiry.
Right.
And then you transition to the updraft of like, wow, man, what if you were able to just focus on the things that really mattered and just not worry so much about disappointing people? What would that be like?
That would feel good.
That would be cool, right?
That's what people are going to think. Yeah. That would be awesome.
Yeah, and then there's another question, like, hey, man, I wonder how we can do that.
Yeah.
And this is not like manipulative stuff, like I kind of know my answers for it, but like my answers might not make any sense to them. So I'm really just inspiring them to think for themselves. What are your solutions?
Right. We're also giving permission to people to arrive to a solution that they feel good about, because this is the follow the herd mentality world, and to give someone the permission, like, come on, think about this, and your answer is good. And if it feels good, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's your next step. If it feels right, like, just go for it, man. Awesome.
I wouldn't say leave your wife and kids or anything like that.
No, you may want to think on that, but maybe that's the right answer. Like, I don't know, it's not my business. My business is to ask good questions, and if somebody really needs something, like, if they come to me with that, I'm going to have a conversation about it, but, I'm no marriage counselor and most likely I'm going to say you should stay where you are until you deal with your shit.
Yeah.
Cool. But anyway, that's another story.
Let's pause for some questions.
I'd love to. There's one last thing I want to say, though, about that was recognizing, this is really important, is that the yardstick for spiritual growth. If you're measuring spiritual growth,
so good.
One of those yardsticks is going to be self-sufficiency. And people become decidedly dependent when you're constantly just feeding them the information and feeding them the answers.
Mm-hmm.
But when you inspire them to think for themselves and come to their own solutions and conclusions,
right,
and then invite them to share that with you after class,
right,
then like that's a real dialogue.
That's awesome.
And you're creating self-sufficiency. That's true spiritual growth.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
I love it. I love it.
So that's a lot.
My question comes back to love and connection, seen and heard.
Mm.
And you kind of touched on this, and so, I'm kind of fuzzy here about that because for me it's almost like an external validation. And rather than, being seen and heard, everybody says, oh, I need to be seen and I need to be heard, but it seems to me that we're looking outside of ourselves to be seen and heard rather than really looking at our own selves.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really, really good
are
point.
we listening to our own selves? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Totally. I know that Nick will have something to share. My idea around this is the more that we can create a deep connection with someone to help them feel seen and heard means that they're going to tap into their being more, I feel. And it's just because you'll be creating that artery of a connection where they're going to be like, this is awesome. How do I go deeper? When someone doesn't feel seen and heard, they're not open, right? They're not connected to you. Mm-hmm. That's my take on it.
Yeah, that's it, and that's really, I was going to say it a little bit differently, but that's pretty much the same idea. It's basically like you're meeting them where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we all have. Like in the absolute, like we wouldn't need any external validation.
Totally.
But I'll be honest with you, like I need some external validation in my relationship. Like I need Kisma to see and hear me. That's really important, It makes me feel like loved. It makes me feel awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important for me, like without that, our relationship would be more frustrating, I'm not going to make it right or wrong. I'm just going to say I'm not living in the absolute.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the thing that helps me get to the next place, being open enough, right? And that's a really important thing because so many people hide stuff. This is a great question. I'm so glad you asked about this. So many people hide stuff that they just won't talk about. And when they feel like somebody really gets them, they'll open up about it. One, they'll realize that I'm not so original. Like this is something that everybody has. And two, they'll air it out. And just in hearing themselves speak it, like they'll hear their words. They're crystallizing those words. And then that gives them a new sense of awareness and a new choice to make.
Mm-hmm.
So what it really does is, like Kisma put it so simply, is basically, hey, it just opens up the door.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does make sense, and this is something that I'm struggling with, and it's on a personal level. It's not on a professional level, and so there are some things where, we all want to be seen and heard, but if you can't keep seeking outside of yourself to be seen and heard always.
No,
always.
true.
And so for me, it's kind of like, I totally get what you're saying because I don't live in the absolute either. I want to be seen. I want to have a little bit of a validation, and it almost seems to me like how much of a how good, you know what I'm saying? How much of a validation do I really need? Why is it that I need to be validated by somebody where if I know I'm standing in my own truth?
That's a really good question. And that's it. That's one of the biggest teachings. Why? When we can ask that question and begin to... Why is it so important for me that I can't stand in my own truth and say, okay, well, I know that I've done A, B, and C, and I've done it, and this is it. This is what I have to give, and, it seems... So then it becomes, anyway, it's not, like I said, it's more of a personal thing. Yeah, so. But I really appreciate it.
But this is what I've kind of been struggling with this absolutely within the last 2 weeks. Love and connection, seen and heard.
Well, and I've gone full circle with this. I mean, coming from like you, a really strong Vedanta background where I can just hear Swamiji, like,
not really.
would you just go study some more and like build your intellect? I can just see it. And
little pea brain.
Right,
Little pea
right.
brain.
Yeah, right.
And he's right. On the other hand, like, okay, I'm studying and I'm building my intellect, but at this moment, I need to be seen and heard. Now, it's always that question, I just love it, is why is that? Because I have someone that comes to my mind, a really talented speaker, kind of transformational coach, but his need, and he will openly say, I need people to just adore me. Like, it's such a need. And what he isn't doing, I feel, is the work to diminish that need. Mm-hmm. So he recognizes it, but I'm like, well, what are you going to do about it, man? Because I see really clearly, if you get rid of that, man, you are going to just have a crazy, amazing career. So all we can do is begin to ask the question, and I like to thread it back, like, where else or when else in my life did I not feel seen and heard?
Well, of course.
You know,
right.
and it's big and it feels
Of course,
heavy.
it goes back to that time that you're still, of course, it goes back to that place, you know, that little inner child or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then you have to really, you know, you have to really delve deep inside. But I do like that idea, you know, like you already touched on it at the very end when you were talking, you know, I think, Nick, you were talking about something about, you know, about the disappointing. Who are you really disappointing?
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, are you disappointing really everyone, or is it you were just disappointing yourself? Have you set yourself up for failure? Mm-hmm.
Rather
than so anyway, it was just kind of interesting, and it just was just like so right where I'm kind of at.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And
thank you for that.
It's great. I highly recommend checking out the 5 love languages. It's a really excellent.
I wrote that down, the 5 love languages. I'm going to stick it up.
Yeah, it's an excellent read. And how because I've used that in class a lot. Like, that's something I've talked about a lot. And how I transition it too is like, wow, I'll ask the question like, wow, like, what if you didn't need that? Mm-hmm. You know, what would that be like? Or another way of putting that is, hey, like, what if you could fill yourself and love yourself so much that it just didn't matter?
Right.
What anybody else thought. So it kind of like it sends a little spin on.
Would I be living on this planet?
Yeah, right. But then the action step, right? The bridge is the action step is like, you know, what can you do to give yourself just a little bit more love right here and right now? Yeah. I'm never looking for the big quantum thing, man. I'm always really just looking for one little step, one little way that people can move the needle in class, and that's how I put it, because it's safe. Like, that's one more thing that they can do. What's one way that you could just give yourself just a little bit more love right now?
Right. Right. I agree, because if you're always looking for that particular validation, it's almost like, you know, you have to. There's something about unconditional love which has no validation, I believe.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And it can dangerously become a habit.
It's called codependency.
Codependency. You know, so my big thing is to look back and see all the times, all the ways, and to do some of the tools, which is cutting cords, to whether if it's a past memory that comes up or a person in my family that comes up, or if Nick comes up, like, just cut the cords and cut the negative. And then chances are there's a place in our lives where we're not fully taking care of us, where we feel depleted and maybe giving out of capacity. Sometimes that's the case. So we need to look at that too.
Right. There's always, it's a dance between the internal and the external of, you know, what it is that you're doing to create that in your life. Like, overgiving is a really big one. Super big. I don't know it's one that I noticed particularly with women too. You know,
we're the nurturers,
you
know, so we will overgive.
So I just noticed that pattern, you know.
Yeah,
anyway.
And the final question, this could seem very heavy, and it might apply, it might not. But look, we always look at this from an energetic perspective. Is there anybody or anything, or is there something that you haven't seen or heard? Right? So it's always worth looking, well, where are we not seeing and hearing somebody that we should be? And it might not be the case, but it's always worth looking.
Yeah. It's
well,
awesome.
I think that is pretty much the case.
Yeah. So where am I doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Where am I doing that?
There is someone here. Correct. There is someone that you're not willing to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating how
damn.
Right.
Right.
Pardon, I had it.
It's fascinating, but it also, that's where the intellect can be so valuable, because when we look at that with the objectivity, it's like, okay, so where am I not seeing or hearing somebody? Oh, okay. How do I shift that? Like, what's my next step? I like what Nick says. I always go for the quantum. Like, I want it now and I want it big. And he's like, what's the next step?
Well, that's the way I think, but the way that I deliver in classes,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, got it.
Because I always want it all at once. Like, that's my default.
Yeah.
But in the classes, I'm thinking of them, and most people do not believe that that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
So
correct. Correct.
So if I can get them to just take one little step in the moment, then they can have a new experience for it, and then that can move them to the next place.
Right.
So,
cool.
But
I love it. Great conversation.
Yeah, what a great dialogue.
And I know we're going to talk soon too, so I'll be reaching out to you.
Okay, good.
Thanks,
all
dear.
Right, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's that dance between the internal and the external is like so important and that's the intellect gets to observe that, and that, that discernment strengthens the intellect. So it's really cool.
Any observation, any discernment strengthens the intellect, because it's sort of like critical thinking. And the key is to do it without judging. And the difference between assessing and judging is our internal reaction. So if you are harshly looking at yourself and beginning to feel really badly, that's self-judging, which isn't going to help. But if you just have that power of introspection, of just kind of going through and noticing all the times and all the ways something comes up, you can kind of check it off. And if we go through that enough every day, there'll be an instance where we're in a situation real time and we catch it. And we're like, oh, this is one of those times I get a little wonky, but I'm not going to get wonky this time. I'm just going to keep my cool. I'm just going to observe.
Yeah. And there's all these neat questions that you can bring up, to inquire. If you feel like somebody's walking all over you, one question might be, well, where am I walking over other people? That's always a good one. The other question is, where am I walking over myself?
Yeah.
Because if I'm doing it to myself, that's making it okay for somebody else to do it, and they wouldn't be doing that to me if energetically I wasn't in tune with that.
Yeah.
So it just opens up all, this is the whole, the whole point of the theme, and the way to make creating themes easier is to have the absolute most, the best practice that you can have, the best spiritual practice of inquiry that you can have into your own self, into your own personality.
Right.
And then you dive into, this is what makes it easy, is then you dive into these specifics in yourself, and then it's just so easy to take them and make them universal.
Yeah.
And then you've got a great theme, and then you don't have to learn a new book or learn a new language in order to teach a class. Like, you can just speak from your heart and ask some good questions and have a dialogue, and it'll be 100 times easier.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I could tell a funny, so this whole energy thing, the internal, the external, it's fascinating. We dive really deep into it. And I know Molly will appreciate this story. So my sister is like an animal whisperer in Columbus, Ohio. She's kind of big. She's a veterinarian, and she does a lot of energy work. So her whole thing is that people will bring her into their home to figure out what's going on with their animals. And basically the animals tell her what's going on. So it's kind of weird, but it's true.
It sounds kind of crazy when you say it out loud, but I think it's pretty cool.
But here's the funny. Yeah. So I was actually on the phone with her today, and she's diagnosed my animals and us so many times. And Lenny, my Boston Terrier, just starts like chasing Miles, Nick's cat. And they're making this big ruckus. And I'm like, oh God, the dog's chasing the cat. And I wanted to say, I'm really not like chasing Nick. I'm not. Because my worried self was like, oh, because her thing would be like, all right, so who's doing what in the house that would make Lenny all of a sudden start lashing out at Miles. But I think it's just his nature.
I kind of think so, yeah.
I don't think I'm doing that to you.
I mean,
maybe I am.
I don't know. I guess there's some more inquiry to be had there. Like maybe there's something going on between us.
But I know, Molly, you and your horses, you get that.
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. Or what about when Sabrina kicks Miles off the bed?
Yeah. So Sabrina's my cat.
She's this little tiny thing. Well, she's not all that sweet. She can be super sweet. But she can also be, and Miles is twice her size, just hanging out, and she'll just decide this is her bed. Bam! And then he's like, and then he's off. He's just gone.
Yeah, so, it's very interesting.
And that's totally your cat. Sabrina's totally your cat, and Miles is totally my cat. So I don't know, maybe there's some kind of...
We got to love on you a little bit more, Nick. Your cat's getting pushed around here.
Pushed around, man. It's always getting back into the corner. What the hell?
Anyways, we have a few more minutes if anyone wants to share.
Yeah, chime in. We'd love to hear what's going on with you.
Hope it's highly entertaining. So what I would like to share is stories are cool if you have the ability to be very clear and directed. So think about it as a design over the class. And what I mean by this is you could start class by opening up a loop. Maybe it's like, guys, the other day I was driving down the 5 and, no, I don't want to say that because I don't want to create that. What's something that you could open up? Oh, I know. I could say something about my daughter, like, the other day my daughter was visiting and I just, we have a great relationship, but all of a sudden the communication stopped and it really flipped me out. And then I would start to go into a little flow or do something. And then later I might come back to, sometimes I realize that when Zoe's getting ready to go overseas, she does this self-preparation of detaching from me. And sometimes I don't handle it really well, but once I realize that this is what she's doing, I'm able to kind of pull back a little bit. All right, let's go through the flow, blah, blah, blah. And then maybe by the end I start, closing the loop about, I realized it was the 2 days before the international trip and it brought back some memories of how she might act previously. And it was really up to me to step into my full potential self and to give her this space. Does anyone feel that with people or whatever? I'm just making this up, but just to show you, trust me, when you mention that someone's detached from you, everybody in the room has gone through that. And so your emotion, and if I ever speak about my daughter in a class, which I will do every now and then, there's emotion that I feel and people feel. And this is what great speakers do on stage is they bring an emotion in that they're feeling. Then people feel not just their emotion, but their own emotion. So when you use an example of, has anybody become detached from you suddenly? Yes, everybody. And then you thread them through a simple story that is about you, but it's universal because you've brought in an emotion that they can relate to. And hopefully you can tie it all up in a pretty bow and give them some ideas of how to handle a situation.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So to kind of break that down, though, too, this is it's a subtle piece that's really powerful, the loop, right?
Yeah.
So it's a cliffhanger is what it is, right? So you watch in an episode, Lost was famous for this, right? You're watching the episode, and then it's just like, at the end, it's just this big cliffhanger. You're like, whoa, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? So you open that up and then it keeps people engaged in it. And then there'll be no problem. You can just what's the word for that? Non sequitur back into it whenever you feel like it. Just whenever the time feels right. You just non sequitur right back into it. Boom, and it'll be fine because they'll be like, oh yeah, I was wondering about that.
Right.
So open loops are really powerful. For mine, I might just say man, I don't know if you've ever had a day like this, but I tried everything and I really tried to do my best and I just felt like I disappointed everybody. Downward dog, everybody.
Yeah.
And it'll kind of trip them out. Now, if you kind of leave it like that for too long, it's a little bit heavy.
It's a little dark.
It's a little bit, yeah, but at the same time, it's really captivating. And if you spin it around and quickly, come back to it and kind of clean it up quickly, you can really, you've really grabbed people.
Right.
And they're thinking about it.
Right.
So those sorts of things are really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I love it.
So, the questions for you would be just, what's really coming up? Kim had an awesome share about what's coming up with her, and I think, hopefully that'll be really valuable for you in your teaching and in your life. So for everybody else on the line, it's what's coming up for you these days? And how can you bring that into the class in a way that's extremely inclusive?
Yeah, and it's in, like with Kim's share, she wouldn't have to go into a very deep, she doesn't have to divulge things she doesn't want to. None of us have to. And I don't recommend it because it's like, it gets a little weird, right? Yeah. But she can simply just be like, oh, man, you know, I feel like ever since the new moon, nobody's hearing me and nobody's seeing me. It's kind of crazy. Anybody go through that? Boom. Next pose.
Yeah. And you make a joke. Like, you know, like invisibility is a pretty cool superpower, but like, I can't turn it on and off.
Yeah. Or you can make it funny, you know, if it's your boyfriend or your husband, you're like, hey guys, here's my boyfriend's number. Please text him and tell him to hear what I have to say.
Yeah.
You know, my whole yoga class, text him. I think he's going to listen, right? And then it's a funny.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. And you just play with people, you know, like, have a dialogue back and forth a little bit, you know.
Right.
For me, like, I was like, the non sequiturs in my classes would just like, once people got in the rhythm of it and how I would do that, they were just, it was just one of those funny little quirks, you know. Yeah. And it's very much my personality. It's really natural to me. So it lets you be who you are and express yourself and just have fun creating a dialogue. Right. It doesn't have to be this big thing that you think through and all this kind of stuff. You know, it's like, it can be just really fun and natural. And that's what I would encourage everybody is like, look at what's coming up for you in your life and consider some ways that you can deliver that and can use it to connect with people. Mm-hmm. And then just create a dialogue around it and really let yourself express.
And really common sense. Like, for instance, stop and think, what would you want to hear about? Right? I remember a couple teachers, one actually talked about going to the bathroom.
Dear God.
And I was like, no, stop, please stop. Another one talked about a horrible car accident she saw. And I was like, oh, people are not coming to yoga. Now.
Are you sure that wasn't the same one?
It was two different teachers.
Okay.
Now, if you hadn't, like, I don't want to be whatever, wishing car accidents, but say you had a flat tire, that's a story that you can tell because you lived it. But don't talk about these dark things that you've seen. People don't want to hear that unless for some reason you're just known as really the dark yogi and people come to your goth classes for that. But I don't recommend it.
No, I mean, it's not, I'm the dark yogi. I wouldn't even do that. Yeah. But I did, in the membership site, there's a funny story about, one of the videos talks about, you know, using a story that just does kind of flip people out. And it was a story that I shared about a time that I almost died. And I didn't realize, like, I was okay. So I was okay with it, you know, but people were really kind of flipped out by that. So, you know, like, don't be afraid. And I guess the moral of that story is, like, don't be afraid to make a mistake.
Don't be afraid to make a mistake.
You might say something that's pretty messed up, you know, and people might flip out a little bit. Mm-hmm. Awesome, man. Like, consider that, like, just consider the opportunity. Like, we talked about this a couple calls ago. Mm-hmm. Consider the opportunity to open up a new conversation.
Yeah.
You know, it just sounds like, man, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. Like, I really appreciate your thoughts, you know. Let's talk about it. How did it make you feel? You know, what happened? And then you can just have a conversation around it and open up a new space. Yeah. And great conversations to be had there.
Totally.
So that's the deal.
Well, awesome. I know this is a lot.